Welcome to the Flourishing Schools Podcast. We are here because we believe that schools should be places where people experience fullness of life. We're interested in anything that has to do with educators helping one another to build increasingly flourishing schools. I'm the host, Matthew Mann, Executive Director of SPH, a group of 5 international schools in Jakarta, Indonesia. And today's topic is student life. One of the things that I've seen as being a very positive development in schools over the past 5 or 6 years is a growing interest in student well-being. And in fact, lists of themes that are predominant in education these days is student well-being. And that's especially the case after the pandemic. Studies are not at all encouraging about the effects of the pandemic in children's lives. And so today I have a guest who's going to help think about student life and how we can help children to live even more flourishing lives. My guest is Dr. Brad Voyles, president of Covenant College. Covenant College is a Christian liberal arts college on beautiful Lookout Mountain in Georgia, USA. I was actually able to spend 3 summers there myself as I did my master's almost 15 years ago there. Brad is new to his role as the president, but he's not new to Covenant, already 19 years and counting. Brad is passionate about students and student life. His role prior to becoming the president was Covenant's vice president for student development and dean of students. And Brad, I'm really glad you've gone out of your way to come here. We're meeting in person in Indonesia. This is Brad's first time in Asia, first time in Indonesia. And I understand you've got an exciting week traveling to Papua, flying into some of our remote interior schools. So welcome to Indonesia. Welcome to SPH.
Thank you so much, Matthew. We are, Kelly, my wife, is with me. And we spent a week in Malaysia with our MAC scholars. And now we're spending a week seeing Jakarta and, as you mentioned, Papua and all that's going on at SPH and UPH. And so we're delighted to be here and delighted to be a part of the podcast.
And also getting a crash course in Indonesian culture. Last night, we introduced you to sambal, which is spicy, for those who don't know, spicy sauce. And also kerupuk, which is kind of like chips, fried, floury chips. So far, you've had some new tastes since arriving.
Yes. Melt in your mouth chips.
So thanks so much for joining me today, for being willing to join the Flourishing Schools podcast. So as I said a few moments ago, I really do want to explore with you this idea of student life. You've now had many, many years of working with students at Covenant College. Of course, the age of your students is different from the age that I deal with in a K-12 school, but I was reflecting that actually I bet the work of supporting them is very, very similar to the work that we do, the kinds of things that you need to be interested in with them. Mm-hmm. About my intro where I commented about the podcast, about the pandemic, I'd be interested. You were at the school before, during, and after. Have you seen the change in the emotional and the stability, the emotional stability of your students? Has their welfare been affected by that, do you think, in any kind of lasting way?
Yeah, I believe, as you indicated, you may have students at a younger age than we do, but the reality is we are inheriting the students from the high schools, the secondary schools. And yeah, we fought as hard as we could to be back in person as a college in fall of 2020, and there were still limitations and distancing and the measures we had to take to try to prioritize health. But we really wanted to fight for the opportunity to be together in person because we know that's the most powerful formative education that you can do. And so, but as we've watched the impacts of the pandemic the last several years, we do notice that there is perhaps a lower levels of resilience, higher levels of loneliness, of anxiety. And so we're not exempt from those trends as a Christ-centered institution, but how we are going about it, we just launched a brand new capital campaign, and a lot of it is to invest in our gathering spaces, our student-centered spaces. And so we see the trends of today where students are constantly isolating more and more, insulating more and more. And so we're trying to we know you're formed in the spaces that you are. And so we're trying to be very intentional about enhancing and creating spaces that students can gather, can collaborate with their faculty and one another to help counter some of these effects.
Oh, that's exciting. So you're doing design work as well for spaces that will foster community.
Absolutely. And just on the tour just now, we saw the new library, and obviously that a lot of thought went into the design of that space to provide different, almost compartmentalized spaces where students can gather together, can do their work collaboratively.
Yeah. Well, when you walk into a school and all you can see are spaces or classrooms that are designed for people to be independent or to be focused on a board or their desk, it's discouraging, it's disheartening. But then you walk into a newer space and you can see that it's designed for community, designed for interaction, and it's just intrinsically inspiring.
Yes, absolutely.
What are some of the other things that happen at Covenant College about mental health or student well-being? Do you have programs that you build or people who are specifically assigned to try to support students?
Yeah, so this is something that's very distinctive to Covenant College. I've not encountered it anywhere else, but we don't believe in freshman buildings, freshman halls. We effectively have every single hall, every single floor of our residence program has freshmen intermingled with upperclassmen. We believe there's real value in the older mentoring the younger, but also the younger bringing a real energy and enthusiasm. And so I think that's a built-in discipleship model that we think helps to counter some of the stresses of college, of the transition, that helps just the younger students learn from what the older students have been developing over time. We do have a wonderful set of counselors who work in our health center. We only hire believers in Jesus Christ in all of our positions on campus, and that includes our counselors. So they are counseling from certainly a model of biblical faithfulness. And so those are resources that are available. We have a warm, inviting chapel program. We require chapel 3 times a week. It's about 35 minutes at a time, and it is most certainly word focused. We worship together, we pray together, the word is taught during that time. And we think, again, that's part of the formative experience, that shared experience. We're all in the room together, having that experience together, and we can talk about it at lunch afterwards. I know a number of our faculty who have class at the 11:45 period right after chapel oftentimes speak to what was just discussed in chapel, and so sort of reinforcing the teaching and what was being learned at that time. And so I don't think you can actually underestimate the value of that. Our coaches are hired not only for their ability to coach their sport, but to disciple their athletes. We think sport is ultimately a platform for the gospel, for discipleship. The same is true for how we hire faculty. We want the utmost in scholarship, but we also care about the discipleship that takes place. And so I think all those pieces come into play to help with the formation and the adjustment to counter what is going on in our culture. And we do have a special office called the Office of Student Success, the Center for Student Success, for those students who are perhaps struggling with, it may be purely academic, but oftentimes academic struggles are symptomatic of other types of struggles. And so between the chapel office, the Center for Student Success, our faculty advisors, our center, our student health center, those are all really ready resources for our students to take advantage of.
So, and about 1,000 students?
That's right.
Okay, so as you're describing this, let's call it a web or really a community that's focused on student learning and student success, I'm contrasting that with my own experience about 25 years ago, where I graduated from a big secular university in Canada that had 25,000 students. And that really, when I look back in hindsight, is an institution that I think had no real fundamental concern for student well-being. It was an institution that provided degrees and programs and classes, and I was a consumer purchasing access to those classrooms. But what happened outside of the classroom, that was entirely my own business. And if any student needed support, really, we would have to go seek that out somewhere else. I'm also thinking about how happy I am, and I should tell our listeners this, that my daughter gets to be at Covenant. She's just finished her second year now at Covenant College. And as parents, we have been able to see through her just how rich that experience is. And you mentioned the chapel, and that's something that she has talked about. One would expect that if students were, let's say, forced to go to chapel 3 times a week, one would expect that they would resent that would be an imposition on their day or their week. But actually, Layla has really affirmed that practice as something that she values, and I sense through her that would be community-wide, that's actually a very key part of the integrity of your program.
Yeah, I'll jump back before I talk more about chapel. You talked about a web, and it reminded me when I do talk to new students and their parents during move-in weekend, I do describe our community as a fishing net. And a net has line after line laid across other lines. And the more lines you have, the smaller the holes in the net. And so this idea of faculty members and staff members and coaches and resident directors, the more that you're laying those lines across each other, the net exists for students to just reach out and grab onto one of those lines to be caught. And so when you said that about the web, it reminded me of that. But yeah, the chapel program, I know there are a number of Christian colleges that don't require it, and I think that's absolutely fine. At Covenant, we talk a lot about good friction and bad friction. And bad friction would be something that you want to eliminate. It's not helpful. Perhaps there's an issue with the dining hall. Perhaps it's a convoluted process for changing a course or to paying your bill. So you're trying to reduce as much bad friction, but there is good friction in life that actually serves a purpose. And so we believe that actually requiring chapel, we require that you attend 80% of the chapel. So that means you get about 9 to 10 skips per semester. And so you use those strategically on those days that you have a test or you're sick or in a way athletic event. But we do think there's real good friction in requiring that, to being there, to being formed in that community. And yes, it's amazing how many students go beyond their requirements. It's amazing. Just recently, we had our last chapel before finals started, and I looked around the room, and the seniors did not want to leave the room. They were hugging. There were tears in their eyes as they were realizing this was the last chapel. And so there is something very special that happens in that room in terms of worshiping. And our external speakers comment on it when they come. They say these students are really worshiping. The sound of their voices wash over them as they sit in the front row, and there's a real enthusiasm that our speakers are greeted with. And then we end every single chapel by the whole student body wraps their arms around each other as we sing the doxology together. So it's a really special experience for those who are able to come enjoy it.
Let's linger on that for a minute, because I'm contrasting what you've just described. And I've never been to a Covenant chapel during the school year, just in the summer. But I'm contrasting that with what I have witnessed in a Christian school once, where the grade, let's say 10, 11, 12 students, our oldest students, were quite disengaged, reluctant to sing, very few singing, and more passive observers there because they had to be there. But then there are some engaged leaders up front who are trying to, motivate and draw people in. What's the difference? How would a school concerned for student flourishing and for the spiritual vibrancy of their student body, how might they be able to help their children or their chapel experience move from that kind of disengagement to what you've described you see 3 times a week at Covenant?
It's a great question. I could go so many different directions, and I'm not even sure there is one answer. I would imagine it's multiples. We pray as you would imagine, as a college, for our students to grow. There's nothing more important to us than the formation of our students more and more into the image of Christ. And so we see the chapel program as that one central experience that everybody has together. And so that's quite a bit of time when you think about 3 chapels in a week that you have to go to. We're very careful about who we invite to speak. Our chaplain interviews each person and lets them know what the purpose of chapel is, what we want to see happen. And so there's a coherence to that. We're also very explicit to our students from the very beginning about a couple different things. One is no devices. You're going to put your phones away. This is like a cell-free phone zone. We're not going to have them there. We also make it very clear from the beginning that this chapel does not replace church. There's nothing more important than them establishing habits now of being a member, a regular attender, a part of a local intergenerational body of believers. And so there's 3 buildings that we close on our campus every Sunday. We close our gym, we close our library, and we close our chapel.
I love that.
And that's, again, to further segment or to cement in their minds that that's not the church. The church is outside of our walls, and you go to the church, and we want that to be something that's important. And so what we see happen in our alumni surveys, every 5 years we do an alumni survey, and again, they came back this year, and our PCA alumni, 95% responded as being regular attenders or members of the local church. 89% of all of our alumni reported that. That's really striking when you look at what the trends nationally are. And so you begin to ask that question, well, why? Why is that the case? Well, I think for one, we're emphasizing it from the beginning, the importance of church, even by our behaviors and our words. We also hire faculty and staff who love the local church. And so our students, I have 90, I'm an elder at my church. I lead the liturgy probably a couple months a year. They see faculty and staff in the local church. And so the people who are teaching them their classes or coaching them in their sport, who are walking around as security guards and grounds crew, they then see them in a different context every Sunday. And so they see, oh, that's important to them personally. So it's important institutionally, it's important personally. And then I would argue that maybe the most important thing just comes from a curricular standpoint, that we're not offering a paper-thin sort of Christianity. We're not afraid to dig into the depths of doubt, of what is the basis for why people leave the faith. We're very confident. You see it in our motto, in all things Christ preeminent, Colossians 1. Jesus Christ is first and foremost. He's central. All things hold together in him. But if you go over to Colossians 2, where it says, all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge are hidden in Jesus Christ. Well, that tells us there's no area of study that we need to avoid. There's no questions we should be afraid to ask, no answers we need to fear. We have the richest, deepest education to provide because it's all in Jesus Christ, and he is preeminent in all things. And so for an example of this, our professors aren't afraid to deal with hard history, with hard topics, because Christ is preeminent. Terrible tragedies of history, we don't have to just sit in hopelessly, but we can hopefully lament. I think about our chapel series the last 2 years with the faculty has been titled, Why I Am Still a Christian. And it's speaking to this wave of folks who are deconstructing, who are deconverting, who are leaving the church. And here's mature Christians who they see every day in the classroom talking through their own testimony of a time when they where they had doubt, where they had a hard situation in their life, a tragedy of some sort, but yet why they are still a Christian. And so I think treating our students in that fashion helps in their maturity and the deepening of their faith, that when hard things happen in their life, they can remember some of what they've heard. So that's something that I think chapel is central to, for sure, but it's not just chapel. It's woven throughout the curriculum. It's woven throughout the co-curriculum.
Well, you're describing what I remember from my MEd, which is that Covenant has been very successful at avoiding a dualism, where faith is relegated to the veneer, to the outside, to the surfaces on the walls, but it's actually integrated into the teaching, into the classroom, where you have people who have, therefore, an integrity, that what they are saying and what they are showing in a public, visible way is also something that's woven into the actual classroom experience, ideally, isn't it, into everything that you do?
Yes. Yeah, it's Psalm 19. It's the book of the world. It's the book of the Word. We believe that we are viewing God's world through the lens of God's Word, and there's it's not a dualistic way of thinking. It is absolutely integrated. You look at who God is, how God is described in Scripture, how he describes himself. He is both author and artist, engineer and architect, teacher and counselor. So as image bearers, we have this opportunity to delve those depths of understanding his world after him and through his wisdom and through his word. And so that is the privilege. We recently had a panel of young alumni, folks who have graduated in the last 10 years, speak at one of our scholarship weekend gatherings. And the panelists were asked to answer a question, something along the lines of, what has been the heart of what Covenant's provided to you? And I'll never forget this answer. This art major who graduated about 5 years ago, she said, and she's working at a design firm in Chattanooga. She said, every month a new app comes out and I can learn how to use that. There's a new software that comes out every 6 months. I can certainly learn how to use that for my field. She's what Covenant College trained in me. Covenant College trained my eye, trained how I view the world, the lens through which I see the world. And so I spoke at commencement about a week ago, and I said at the very end, students, understand this. Your Covenant degree will never be less valuable than it is today. And it kind of gave a little bit of a pause. But the reality is we've given you a lens through which to view the world. We've given you a foundation upon which to stand. We've given you a framework upon which to hang all your experience. And so that education will only gain value as you view life through that lens, as you hang those life experiences on that framework, as you trust more and more in the sturdiness and the durability of that foundation. And so that's I believe the real gift of the Covenant project, of the education that we're providing to our students.
That's beautiful. You're really describing, I think, the answer to the question of student flourishing. That if children, in your case, I wouldn't say children, young adults are blessed with a few years, 4 years of that kind of formation, they are far more likely to be flourishing people, to be healthy and rounded people. I just want to go back to one concept that came up before when you talked about, I think, a Center for Student Success.
Yes.
So K-12 schools have to deal with, and colleges have to deal with this issue of success. And where I live in Asia, it's a particularly interesting thing because there's often a disagreement between the school and the family as to what success looks like.
Yeah.
Where many of our families would have a vision of success that has to do with academics primarily, that a score is the best determinant of how successful that individual is. So tell me about that. How at your school are you helping your young people to have a really grounded, faithful, godly vision of what success looks like?
So I was a part of determining a name for that center years ago. We had a director of academic support, but she primarily worked out of her office. But when we had an opportunity to take a section of the library and convert it into a center where she would have an office and there'd be another sort of academic coach in that office, it was time to determine a name. And there was pushback as we talked about student stewardship, student excellence, student success is what we eventually landed on. And so the very question that you're asking was, what does that mean? And I said, well, the way I like to think about it is this, the parable of the talents. Some students are given 5 talents, some are given 3, and some are given, and we have the whole range that come to us. And so it's never exclusively about your aptitude. It is about your stewardship. And so the student that has been given just one talent, and who has worked really hard and gotten that C+, that's success. There's students that are given 5 talents that we've watched that they should be getting an A, and they're getting less than that. And so, is that success? I would argue probably not a good steward of the gifts, of the talents that they've been given. And so I think we're coming at it from an approach of what have you been given, and how are you applying that, and how can we come alongside to help you think through certainly study strategies and time management, and even how to read a textbook. It's different than how you read a novel, or how to take notes. And so there's opportunities to develop your talents, but to me, it's really an issue of stewardship.
I 100% agree. And actually, as you speak, I am reminded of a conversation here between 2 of our university counselors who were talking about a student looking ahead to studies in a future year, who was interested in studying in the United States, but at a school that did not have the net that you were talking about earlier. And they said Covenant College, and they listed 1 or 2 other colleges, that would be a place where this student would be successful. And I just thought that was a real testament to what you've done in building something that is really oriented around, truly around student flourishing.
No, it's really wonderful to hear that affirmation, because that is, we've built out that office more. We think students can come in and succeed at Covenant. And it's not just because of that center. We do have also a math center, a language center, a writing center to help, but our faculty are willing to stay after and to meet, to have students, to gather to study over lunch for an exam that's coming up, to have those advising meetings. And so there's a beauty to the net coming around the student, and knowing we're going to help you with that, because we do care about your stewardship of your gifts and ultimately your success.
There's some really good research in the past 5 or 6 years about flourishing in Christian schools. And the research is very clear that relationships, a domain of relationships, is one of the key determinants of flourishing in a school. And you are describing a context where students are surrounded by healthy relationships. And so as an institution and as students, they will know that very well. Brad, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your tour here of Indonesia to sit down for a little bit and talk about something which is so core to the work that I do at SPH, and that I know is core to the work you do at Covenant College. Really great to meet you here. And I'd like to thank as well our listeners for joining us at the Flourishing Schools Podcast.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity.